Good evening, Carja. This is Matt Carty, MEP, here in the European Parliament in Strasbourg, and for our 14th show we're here for Not the RTE News, and we've a really special guest with us tonight because Jill Evans is an MEP from Plaid, Cymru, which is the Party of Wales. We're going to talk to Jill in a minute. Somebody none of you will have ever met before is Lynn Boylan, MEP from Dublin, and Eileen Scollan, who was on once before, is our senior political advisor in my office. Basically, the woman who makes all the things tick and makes me as brilliant as I am, because she makes sure all the work is done. So, listen, thanks very much. As I say, we're finding it very difficult to meet the gender quotas. I'm here again with an all-woman cast. It's just very hard to find the men who have the time or the expertise to come on to our show. But anyway, we'll have to make do once again with an all-female cast. Jill, thanks a million for coming along.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. You're a good friend of Ireland, and obviously you've been here almost 20 years, you were telling us.
Yes,
So,
next year it'll be 20 years since I was first elected, yes.
and what committees do you sit on?
At the moment I sit on the Transport Committee and the Culture Committee, but for many years I was on the Environment Committee, so that's a big interest.
Yeah, busy work. So what's the crack in Wales at the minute?
Well, of course, leaving the EU is the big issue that dominates everything, but also the threat that the UK government has posed to our democracy in Wales through that, even though the National Assembly has passed a continuity bill, in other words, to ensure that all the powers coming back from the EU come to Wales in those areas which are devolved. The UK government is trying to centralise those powers in London, and it seems that the UK is actually going to take the Welsh government to the Supreme Court over this. So we're not only trying to ensure that Wales suffers as little damage as possible if we do actually leave, but we're also fighting to maintain those powers that people in Wales voted for.
So, but people in Wales voted for Brexit as well, or a small majority of them. What happened there?
Majority. Well, the press and the media in Wales is very weak. It's not very effective. A lot of people read the London media, and even though the situation was very different in Wales in terms of the benefits of EU membership, that message didn't get through to people. But nevertheless, however, people voted. My job as an MEP is to defend Wales's interest, and I believe Wales's interest is best served in the EU, and I still keep working for that.
And you think it's a possibility at all?
It's a
because you have a weaker case than, say,
think
Scotland or obviously the north of Ireland, which is, but in terms of, because the mandate that the people threw, it was a spanner in the works. People were surprised by, I think, the Welsh vote. Yes,
we all were. But I think it's my duty to do that until we actually leave. I think there is a chance that we could stay. And I hope that the people of Wales will change their minds in substantial numbers. And
is there any sign that there has been a shift in opinion since?
There's a small shift. It's not yet a big shift. I don't know if people really understand the full consequences of that yet. But we'll keep working on it.
Because there's a lot of English people living in Wales, isn't there?
Yes,
you really need tighter border controls. You take back control of your... I lived in Wales for a year. Do you know that? Yeah,
I didn't know
a place
that.
called Holland. No, I didn't have a great experience, I have to say. It was at a very young age, but it was a lot of English in the place. If it was the town I lived in, if it was in Ireland, they'd call it a garrison town. It was. So that sort of clouded my judgment. It was only actually later years I actually learned about the great history of the Welsh independence movement. It's still a movement, it's still a desire among a lot of people in Wales, but there isn't any clear sign that the Welsh people actually see the importance of independence.
Things are changing, and in fact, since the EU referendum vote, the organisation called Yes Cymru, which is the independence organisation, the independence movement, has grown tremendously, and there are branches springing up all over the country, and so the support for independence is growing in the wake of the vote to leave the EU.
Okay.
But we would like to see
what percentage would it
within the EU.
Yeah, absolutely. So what like opinion polls? What did they say that the support for independence is at all? With the caveat that independence polls are always under-reflected.
There was one at 11%. It's maybe even as at 15%. I mean, we're not looking at majority
yet
numbers, but it's the speed at which it's growing, I think, is interesting. The enthusiasm for it, particularly with young people, and particularly with what we've seen in Catalonia. That's had a big effect as well. People are outraged with how the Catalan people have been treated, and that's made people want to do something for themselves as well. Yeah,
and just finally, before we come back to you later, in terms of the language, I think one of the things and lessons that a lot of Irish people point to Wales is at the language movement, the visibility of the Welsh language as you're driving through. It's cited a lot in the north of Ireland, as you know, where the DUP have a fear that recognition of the Irish language would chip away at their Britishness or something. But as I say, there's lots of people who would claim to be British living in Wales who still embrace the language by the looks of it. You speak Welsh yourself?
I do, yes.
It's a very tough language. Say something in Welsh. Say something in Welsh. Are you a native speaker?
No, I'm not. I learned it at school.
Okay.
When I was in my teens in school. Okay. But no, it's through the education system, through the Welsh schools movement, that there was a real revival in the Welsh language. But that came about largely because of parents, non-Welsh speaking parents, who wanted their children to speak the language and pressure.
It's a universal story,
more
isn't
and more schools. Yes, and then we had the Welsh Language Act, of course, which was extremely important.
Did that come through the devolved institution?
No, the first act came from Westminster, but it is an official language in Wales, and so the Assembly operates bilingually. I've been working hard, campaigning at this
level get Welsh recognised,
to get Welsh recognised here. It's not fully, but it's a kind of semi-official language now here, so you can use Welsh to some extent with the EU institutions. But, that's been a long struggle.
Don't forget, you can leave any comments, any questions you have for Jill or any of our own guests. And remember, if you hit share, you'll be in with a chance of winning a Towards the United Ireland mug. You'll be very surprised, Jill. These are very sought after. We've heard stories and rumours of barroom brawls, I should have said. That was nearly a Freudian slip there, in order to get people to get their hands on these mugs. So we're going to let you keep your one. Yeah, we're going to let you keep yours. Lynn, we had Emmanuel Macron, the saviour of the EU, we're told, here in Parliament during
the EU's JFK, apparently, is what he was being referred to. I thought that was the
Varadkar, no? So,
no.
what sort of a neck would you need to have to come and talk to about 700 parliamentarians and talk about peace and democracy a couple of days after you're literally levelling a place with bombs?
Well, I think that's it.
With no mandate?
No mandate whatsoever. The legal organisation, the international organisation that is supposed to look at chemical attacks, had landed. They literally were on the ground ready to carry out their inspections, but the British, Americans and French decided that they knew better, and have just, I suppose, caused more destabilisation in that region by the attacks that they did, and as you said, were illegal attacks at that. But for him to come in and, I suppose, talk about it was a strike for honour, I think that most of us now, we're sickened to our stomach actually to hear him say that, and to be so defensive of, that this was somehow something that we should be proud of what he'd done, as opposed to, it was, even if he had come in and said, look, we had no choice, you can disagree with that, but the way that he couched it in the language that he was absolutely proud of the fact that these missiles were dropped. So it's deeply concerning, because we know that Emmanuel Macron has a vision for Europe, one that I suppose absolutely drives further centralisation of powers, and militarisation is one of his key areas that he wants to see a far more united front. And for him, PESCO, which we've talked about on this show before, which the Irish government have signed us up to despite being a neutral country, doesn't go far enough as far as Emmanuel Macron is concerned, and he wants to have a parallel body that's set up, which is sort of particularly interested in missions in North Africa, interestingly enough. And I mean, let's not talk about the French history in North Africa and why they might need to be going into those regions. So very worrying language by Emmanuel Macron, and I certainly don't share the views of some who think he's some sort of saviour. I actually think that the problem is while nobody wanted to see Front National get elected in France, I don't think Emmanuel Macron is going to do anything. His politics aren't going to do anything to address the concerns of those people in France.
I'm going to come back to that, because I just want to touch on Syria for a moment, because Eileen, lots of people are looking at Syria and they're just saying it's hopeless. Sure, what harm would a few bombs do? Any of might liven or shaking things up a bit? Like, what needs to happen there?
I mean, at this stage, like Lynn was saying, the speech yesterday was full of contradictions. Macron talked about how he was from a generation that wasn't affected by war a few days after he dropped bombs on Syria. It's been far too long since there's been any engagement to try and talk about peace in the region. That we keep hearing these statements about a political solution. It's been years since there's been any kind of attempt to make peace in this region, and it's not just with Syria. I mean, if we're really talking about solving the crisis, it's more than just looking at what's going on in the region. It's looking at mass displacement, refugees, how we're dealing with people that are coming to our own shores. There's violence on all fronts. Setting up a fortress Europe isn't going to help any of this.
Yeah, well, not when you're doing, because I was actually doing a Vox Box earlier on. I was saying that, for those people who want to stop the refugees coming, well, get your governments to stop bombing their countries. And
but interestingly, the three countries who did drop the bombs all have a huge kickback within their own populations around refugees and foreigners. I mean, Donald Trump, France, and if you look at some of the Brexit debate, was all about an anti-foreigner sentiment, and yet here they are actually creating a situation where there's going to be more refugees, and they're not prepared then to step up to the plate to take those refugees.
Is it any coincidence that anywhere in the world where you see prolonged conflict, the Brits were there at some point?
Well,
maybe you're too diplomatic to say that, but...
Well, I'm very proud that my party opposed the bombing and condemned the bombing in
And you would have stood up to Tony Blair's attack in Iraq, which arguably is the root cause of a lot of the
We've
more
been
recent...
very consistent, and I think we have a very proud record on that. And it's not just that Parliament wasn't consulted, it's not just that it wasn't a United Nations action, it's that we all know that dropping bombs is not going to solve anything. It makes it all worse. You can't counter violence with violence, and there's no planning for peace, as you said. It's gone on for years now, and there's no serious planning to bring peace to Syria and to the Syrian people.
And even with that, with Emmanuel Macron's speech and with Theresa May's speech in the Parliament, nobody has outlined the strategy for what comes after this. No. So now you've dropped these missiles. Yeah. What is your strategy now? You're saying that you took out the chemical plants, but where do you go to from here? Yeah,
but Eileen, one of the things, like in fairness, there are people in England, there are people in France, there are people in America, genuine people who saw the images of the chemical attack, and people will have different views on it, but they were demanding that their governments did something. So we're in charge of the world someday. We're the powerhouse. This is the decision-making body. We'll be the controller. I'll obviously be in charge, but I'll take your views.
You'll have a cat at that stage.
What's the solution to Syria? I
mean, there's no. I mean, if I knew what the solution to Syria was, I think somebody else higher up than me would know, and we would be getting out of this.
You're a senior political advisor for Sinn Féin, Eileen. So don't put yourself down.
Yeah, but I mean, it's every now and then it boils up a little bit, and the press starts covering it, and we see horrible images in the press, and then somebody makes a statement about it, and then it will all die down for a while. I mean, the war has been raging for 5 years now, and there just hasn't been any genuine movement on it. Any attempt to introduce the new resolution into the UN has failed. We've seen vetoes. That avenue is obviously this avenue is obviously defunct now. So we need to see movement by perhaps Federica Mogherini. I mean, she was in the Parliament this week, and she was talking about the event that's taking place next week, which is they're gathering actors together for humanitarian assistance. But when was the last time that we gathered together multinational actors to talk about peace, to talk about...
Yeah.
But on that, I mean, the key to this, and it's not just about Syria, the key to this is disarmament. I mean, and Ireland actually played a very key role in the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, and also on the cluster bombings. And we were able to do that because we were honest brokers as a neutral country, and that's been undermined now by current government policy. But the key to addressing these issues, because Syria is a proxy war for Russia, for America, for the Saudis, for Iran. They've all got skin in the game.
Israel are stuck in the middle of it, and we'll come to them in a minute.
And this is the point that I was making at the weekend, is that we were all horrified by those images at the weekend, but more children have died by the conflict over the last 5 years than those attacks. But the only country that has not signed up to the protocol on chemical weapons is Israel. And we know, we've seen the attacks on Israel and the shocking scenes that have come out of that in Palestine, and no action is taken by the international community.
And that's the point I wanted to
it is
move
about
on.
the double standards, but also the end game to this should be that the institution should be working towards disarmament and towards those international protocols around chemical weapons, around the use of weapons, and that's the end game where we've got to go to.
You were in Palestine with me a couple of years ago. When was that? 2014? Was it the first year we came over?
Yes.
And it was just after the bombardment.
Protective edge.
And we're now at a point where literally the Israeli forces believe that they can get away with openly shooting dead people for protesting.
Which violates all international law to use.
It's like Ireland 1972, multiplied by.
Exactly, but the point is that they get away with it because, obviously not Sinn Féin's policy, but the governments turn a blind eye to their actions, but then design red lines for other political actions. And at the end of the day, that's why they're doing it, because they're facilitated to do it. So. I just think it's rich when you're hearing this moral grandstanding in the Parliament and in the various parliaments across the world that dropped those missiles in Syria, that they don't make the same grandstanding when it comes to Israel at all.
And then you're looking at the Israelis and you're thinking they're cool, calculated, must have, some intelligence behind it all, and then Micheál McDonagh pops up and beats them all. We were telling you this story beforehand. Ard Vera McDonagh.
And you would think that the Israelis would know their way around a few fathers, since they've enough Irish passports from their missions abroad.
So but on a serious note, again, who says to first citizen of a major European city, you're not allowed into our country because you're going to say something that we
don't
disagree with.
But he wasn't even trying to go to their country, which is the point. He's going to Palestine, and that is the problem as well, that Palestine doesn't have control of its own borders.
We were banned from getting into Gaza. Have you ever been over in Palestine, Jill?
I've been many times, really, and I went to Gaza several times too before the blockade. And that delegations, official delegations from this Parliament are not allowed through. I've been to the border with Gaza, where we've been kept waiting for hours and hours and hours, and then just sent away and treated with contempt. And we've raised it, of course, many times here. I know very well the situation in Palestine, and there's a very strong solidarity movement in Wales as well. And but we keep raising the issues here, and nothing more is done.
But the hypocrisy sometimes in this place, because I've seen these resolutions where they'll say even the right thing in terms of condemnation of Israel, but as soon as someone puts forward an amendment to a report that says, by the way, we're going to actually stop funding Israeli settlements, or we're going to actually get our money back, as happened in Gaza. When I remember, it was one of the most bizarre things where the MEPs put forward an amendment saying Israel is after damaging European property in Gaza, so we're going to get them to pay for it. So it would seem like a first step. And the European Parliament, majority members voted against it. So as long as you keep, as long as you keep saying to Israel, we're going to say nasty things, or we're going to hard-hitting things, but you're actually not going to suffer any consequences whatsoever. Well then,
but there's also a worrying trend that you're seeing now in terms of criticism of Israel, and it's being exploited to sort of somehow say that if you criticise the Israeli Zionist regime, that you're anti-Semitic, despite the fact that lots of Jewish communities have come out opposed to the system. But on the flip side of that, where you do actually have very clearly an anti-Semitic party who've just gotten recently re-elected in Hungary, ran a campaign that was completely anti-Semitic, are within the largest group in the European Parliament. They're members of the EPP.
Yeah, Friends of Fine Gael.
Friends of Fine Gael.
Yeah, Viktor Orban. So listen, hit share, win a mug, Even if you don't win a mug, and lots of people don't win mugs because just the odds, but it's still. So we're going to ask you to do a wee draw. Would you pick a number, Jill, between 1 and 65, please?
44.
44. Who's 44? 44. Oh, Phelan. I think Phelan actually won one before. Phelan McFadgen is from Donegal. He's a good lad. He had
Well, now he can have a friend over for tea.
He's commented, when are we going to have Senator Pádraig McLaughlin on Not the RTE News? Well, Pádraig, there's an official invitation. We won't pay your transport, we won't pay your accommodation, but if you do make it as far as Brussels or Strasbourg, we'll have you on Not the RTE News. So, Lynn, very quickly, Dennis Naughton, will he last a week? Will he last a month? When's he going?
Oh, he's on very, very shaky ground. I listened to his explanations and they don't hold water. You know, he told Brian Stanley, the Sinn Féin TD, on the 6th of December that it wouldn't be appropriate for him to comment regarding the media merger, and yet he was able to tell a lobbyist on the 12th of November that the merger was going to be referred to the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland. So he was telling the Houses of the Parliament one thing, but lobbyists another thing, on a private phone call that wasn't logged with the lobbyist register. So I think he's in real trouble. And I know that the Taoiseach also has to correct the record because he initially said this decision was in January.
The I&M store is just rotten to the core.
It really is. There'll be great films made out of it in the future in terms of the intrigue. And yeah, nobody would believe it if
we have oligarch. Am I allowed to call him that?
I don't know now. He's a very litigious individual.
I didn't say who it was. I was calling an oligarch.
That.
But he owns, one of these guys owns lots of the media in Ireland and is,
But it was interesting to hear that at least,
data breach in terms of
you know, Minister Naughton citing the importance of the report that the GUE NGL group commissioned on media ownership in Ireland, that I had drove that project forward, and that was part of the reason why that media merger was sent to Broadcasting Authority of Ireland. So it at least, do you know what I mean, that's a good body of work that the party's done. But what we need to now see happen on the broader issue, putting the I&M saga, which I reckon is going to roll for a year at least in terms of court cases, is that the government now need to get a grasp on the whole issue of media landscape in Ireland, how it's controlled, who owns it, communicative power, because it's not just about newspapers, it's about whether you're social media platforms, whether you own radio stations. We need to look at the defamation laws. We also need to look at how do you actually financially invest in investigative journalism, because that's what we need to go back to doing, is having journalists being able to do their job, being able to print the stories in the public interest without fear of being slapped with a legal letter. And at the moment, the media industry isn't able to financially support them. So we have to look at mechanisms to do that. Otherwise, we're just opening the doors to the whole idea of disinformation and fake news.
Eileen, I suppose we'd be remiss if we didn't mention antimicrobial resistance. We did a lot of work this week. We look like we're working on a file for an opinion from the Agri Committee for MV file, is it?
Yep, it's an Agri opinion for an MV file.
And we reckon we'll get it over the line on Tuesday.
Tuesday morning, yeah, final vote.
Tell people what it means.
Yes, we've been working on it for a few months now. Antimicrobial resistance is going to affect 50 million people in 20 years.
People become immune to...
People becoming immune to antibiotics due to overuse, and the Agri Committee specifically looked at overuse in the agricultural sector in animals, which is one of the major uses of where antibiotics are used. So, yeah, it was a good process.
Eileen has done massive work for us. Jill, what are you working on? Any big issues over here? Or how do you balance the European politics with the domestic politics, I suppose?
Well, the same as you. There's a lot of travelling back and forth, and try and keep constituents informed as much as possible. But
your constituency is all of Wales?
All of Wales, yeah.
It's a big constituency.
I'm working on...
He complains about the size of his constituency.
All right.
I don't complain. I love every square inch of it. Yeah.
I'm writing a report on language technology, new technology, and how to support and have equality amongst
languages. And really important then for the lesser
minority
used languages.
Yeah, it is important. And on the Transport Committee, I've been doing a lot of work. I've been to Ireland recently.
We over at the
we went to Cork and to Dublin.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get to
interesting.
any of the parts of the country where we've literally no public transport. But I think that was.
There.
But I saw the Greenway, the fantastic cycle route that you have, and we're trying to develop cycle routes in Wales so we can learn a lot from
Do you actually get a lot of Irish tourists? I've been noticing in the last couple of years more and more people, are going over to Wales for the.
Yeah,
the drink must be cheaper, is it?
It is cheaper to travel to Wales or to the UK than it is for us to go to Ireland at the moment. But I think it's happening both ways. I think the connections have always been strong, of course, but I think they're stronger than ever.
If you're talking to any Welsh holidaymakers, tell them to come to County Monaghan. We're always delighted.
The Brecon beacons are fantastic.
Dublin isn't there. So listen, this weekend in Cartmacross, reigniting radical youth politics. It's an initiative that we got our group here in the European Parliament to agree to host. So it's we're lots of speakers from the trade union movement, from radical youth campaigns, and basically we've people from 15 different European countries. Lynn's coming down on Friday night.
I am indeed.
So
I'm
the first round is on Lynn, and going to be lots of bands playing and everything. So we're hoping that it might turn into a festival over time. But you need to actually log on. So I'm sure somebody will put on the comments there the Eventbrite page, because it needs to be pre-registered. Matthias, I think we're going to finish up now very shortly. But Jill, absolutely brilliant having you on. Look forward to the day when we have an independent Wales and a united Ireland, and our friends from Scotland are joining us, and we can
and the
talking about the request for the financial contribution from the English, who have suffered economic devastation over the previous 10 years, and we'll consider it.
Diolch yn fawr, there's a bit of Welsh.
So thanks to Matthias and the team here. Big news this week, of course, was the passing of a legend, Big Tom from County Monaghan. He was the voice in many ways of a generation, certainly for that generation that was forced to emigrate to all parts of the world. Big Tom became a link with them. He's from Castleblaney in County Monaghan. He's going to be laid to rest over the next day, and we just want to say Ariashe Gorau Ahanam Yilis. In case you're wondering, this wasn't the RT News, and we're going to try and finish on a bit of music. We have to press this.
Yeah, since listening to it over and